Hello everybody, welcome to Fast Class number 4. Today we are going to be talking about sentencing and offender classification. I hope that you guys are still doing well, that you feel comfortable reaching out to me if you need to talk about any of the things that we cover in these Fast classes so that I can get you guys to better understand. Alrighty, so we will move on forward. So the basics, right? First, we have to talk about what a sentence is. A sentence is a penalty imposed by the court on a person convicted of a crime. All right, so that's pretty simple, right? When we commit crimes, whether I say we, not we, but when an offender commits a crime, they will go to the court. The court will determine if they're innocent or guilty. If they are guilty, then they will be issued a sentence. If they're innocent, of course, they will be released and they won't be issued a sentence. A sentence gives us two key pieces of information: the type of punishment and the punishment length. Okay? So when I say type of punishment, that means, is the offender going to get prison? Are they going to get jail? Are they going to go on probation? Are they going to have to do community service? All of those are types of punishment. The punishment length is the second part of the sentence, and that's just what it sounds like. It's going to be however long that the sentence needs to be imposed. So that's going to be 3 years in prison, 4 months of community service, 2 months on probation. So those are your two main concepts of a sentence, okay? Is the type of punishment and the punishment length. There are a couple different things that impact what a sentence can be. The first one is going to be offense seriousness. So if you have an individual who has caused significant harm to other people in the form of a rape, a murder, a physical assault, whether they hit somebody with their car, all of these types of things are going to be more serious, say, than somebody who shoplifted, a couple of outfits from J. Crew. Okay, so offense seriousness comes into play. And the more serious the crime, the longer and more serious the punishment. So we can argue that prison is much more serious than probation, right? It's on a continuum. So the continuum is the more serious the offense, the more serious the punishment. And also, generally, the longer the punishment length, okay? The next thing that sentences are impacted by is criminal history. So when we look at maybe two individuals and they've committed the same crime, all right, so they've both shoplifted over $100 worth of merchandise from a store, okay? Criminal A has had no previous criminal convictions. Criminal B, on the other hand, has a long history of shoplifting and drug use. Okay, so now we're talking about criminal history. Criminal B has a much more extensive criminal history. That's going to impact their type of punishment and their punishment length. So criminal A, who may have just gotten a couple of months probation, plus maybe paying a restitution or something to the store, is not going to get any jail time. However, criminal B, it may be that at this point in time, he's committed enough crimes that he will, in fact, serve 8 to 10 months in a local jail. Okay, so that is the basics of a sentence, of running down what's going on here. We'll talk a little bit about sentencing trends. Overall, when we talk about sentencing and we look at how we're sentencing people, we are getting tougher. Okay, so what that means is that we are convicting people and we are sentencing them to more serious sentences. Okay, so we are sending them to prison more often. We're sending them to jail more often than we are giving probation. When we look at felony convictions in the United States, 94% of those felony convictions occurred within state courts. So this is something that happens on a state level. The average sentence for a violent offense is 97 months, and that's just over 8 years. But trending research has shown that that is actually decreasing. Okay, so we are actually giving people less time for violent offenses. Some other numbers are 47 months is average for property offenses, 50 months is average for drug offenses, weapon offenses is about 48 months, and then all other offenses ranged from 41 to 42 months. And all of this is in your textbook. That's on page 95, if you're following along. So the reason that people want to have trends on sentencing, right? They want to study how sentencing is going on over time, is because we want to make sure that what we are doing to sentence criminals is working. And unfortunately, it has shown that it's not necessarily working. Now, there isn't a lot of data to prove that the breakdown in the system is in the sentencing phase. It could be a breakdown somewhere else, like maybe offenders aren't getting the treatment they need. Maybe some offender didn't need to be sentenced to prison anyway. They would have been fine if they had just gotten a high level or a highly supervised level of probation. So that's one of the reasons why we keep up with and study sentencing trends. The next major part of the textbook, the chapter that I want to talk to you about, is called Truth in Sentencing. So truth in sentencing is basically, what I want you to remember is that it's what offenders are supposed to serve, so the time that they're supposed to serve versus what they actually serve. A lot of times when you look at an offender's sentence, they may be sentenced to 25 years. More likely than not, they are not going to serve all 25 years inside of a prison. Now, they may serve 19 years inside of the prison, and then they will serve their last 6 years on parole out in the community. Now, there are a number of reasons why they're not serving their entire sentence within the prison system, and one of them is due to overcrowding. Prisons are extremely overcrowded, and that's due to the fact that sentencing is getting tougher, and we are sending more people to prison, right? So it's cyclical. It's all connected. Another reason that offenders are not serving their entire sentence is good time. And you may be aware of what good time is. You might not be, but good time is when an offender does certain things. They go to a treatment program. They stay clean for X amount of time. They don't have any infringements in the institution. They can get time off of their sentence. Okay, so those are two reasons that offenders may not serve exactly what they are supposed to serve. Now, is that fair, right? Put yourself in the shoes of someone who has lost a loved one to maybe a drunk driver or murder, and think about, would you want that offender to get out of prison early? Probably not. Probably you would want them to stay in prison forever. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen either. And in 1994, they came up with the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. This act assured that offenders served a larger portion of their sentences. Okay, so this is people who have come forward and said, these inmates are not serving enough of their time in prison. We don't feel like they're being punished enough for the acts that they've committed. So what the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act did was it required states to set a percentage that their inmates had to complete before they could be eligible for parole. Now, most states require that offenders have to serve 85% of their prison sentence in order to be eligible for parole. There are a couple of states that only require 50%, and then there are even fewer that only require, that require an offender to complete 100% of their sentence. Then they're eligible. So that's what the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act set out to do. It set out to make sure that what was being sentenced was actually being served. Now, in with sentencing, there are also specialized courts that individuals can be sentenced to, so to say. The first one are drug courts, okay? The idea of drug courts is that you have an individual who is sick. They are addicted to drugs and they need help. So drug courts link supervision, judicial oversight, and treatment all together, okay? So it puts all of the resources that someone who is addicted to drugs will need to get better in one place. It's a one-stop shop. So drug courts include access to treatment, frequent drug testing, and different types of evaluations. Drug courts and specialized courts in general are special, because the judge and the defendant have times where they will meet one-on-one to discuss their progress, to discuss the defendant's progress through treatment. DWI, so that's driving while intoxicated, that's driving under the influence, operating motor vehicle under the influence. I know different jurisdictions have different names for it, but basically DWI courts are for individuals who operate motor vehicles while they're under the influence. Now, driving while intoxicated is actually a very common criminal offense. It's maybe the most common one. And most drunk drivers are not habitual. So that means most of the people who get caught with a DUI or a DWI aren't individuals who have been caught time and time again. It's, my aunt who had one too many at her bingo game, and she was just barely over the limit when she got pulled over. Okay, so like I said, they're not most of them are not habitual. They are not ones that will continue to repeat and repeat. Now, however, there are those who will repeat and repeat, and they get stronger sanctions put upon them. But for just the one and done people who make a mistake, DWI courts are very effective for them. And one of the things that is most effective in DWI courts are called victim impact statements. Victim impact statements are basically individuals who have been impacted by drunk driving in one way or another, whether they were somebody who had been hit by a drunk driver, whether they lost somebody to being hit by a drunk driver, whether it is a former drunk driver who lost control and killed someone else or hurt themselves in some way. They write a letter, they come to the DWI court, and then they read their victim impact statements. And these are generally very emotional, very effective in helping the defendants realize that what they did was wrong and that it's dangerous. So DWI courts are generally effective, and they're really good for those one and done type people. The next type of a specialized court is a mental health court. So mental health courts address the special needs of defendants with mental illnesses. It is arguable that I would say a majority of individuals who are serving time in prison and jails have some type of mental illness, whether it be depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder. Any of these individuals who are in prison probably suffer from one of them. I suffer from generalized anxiety disorder, so I can understand what it's like to have to live with a mental illness, and I'm sure some of you do too. But mental health courts are there to keep people who are severely mentally ill out of prison, okay? Because I think that we could probably agree people who are on the verge of having an anxiety attack or are spiraling into a major depressive episode are not going to do well in a stone and steel room. So, mental health courts are there as a choice for the defendant. Mental health courts, while they're available, are not generally sentenced to somebody. They are generally given as an option. So, they can either do the mental health court or they can go to jail. Okay. And the reason that they do that is so that there is no stigma around going to a mental health court, because there's going to be lots of treatment. There's going to be lots of talks with the judge, with your caseworker, with therapists or psychiatrists. They may even recommend that you start a medication. All of these things can be generally stigmatized in the general population. So, in order to make sure that there is no stigma there, to being sentenced, forced to go to a mental health court, mental health courts are made to be a choice. Okay? The last thing that I'm going to talk to you about is offender classification and assessment. So, when an individual is sentenced to an institution, they will be classified and assessed. So, they are classified to determine where they should be housed. So, that's what kind of risk that they pose to the institution. Are they somebody who could do well with not a lot of walls? Are they somebody who's going to need constant supervision? That sort of thing. They are assessed to determine what kind of treatment programs they should be involved in. So, that assessment can help determine any type of mental illnesses. It can help determine if an individual is struggling with substance abuse. I'm going to say that the assessment also helps determine whether or not that an individual needs help with trying to think of a good way to say it, with their sexual violence, like their impulse control around that. And so there are many assessments that correctional institutions use to check for psychopathy, to check for prevalence of violence and of sexual violence. So they basically can predict what kind of treatment and therapy programs that an inmate should be in once they're admitted to the institution. Now, the same thing happens with probation and parole. They also classify and assess parole and probation clients. So they have a post-conviction risk assessment, and so that's for individuals who are leaving prison to determine what their risk level is. So an individual who is leaving prison on good terms, they haven't had any issues, they've served most of their sentence, they're going to be on a lower risk assessment. They may only have to check in with their parole officer 3 times a month instead of every week. Whereas if you have somebody who is causing a lot more trouble, they may need a more intensive form of probation or parole. And we'll talk more about that as we move into those chapters. I think that's chapters 8. Chapter 8, I think, is probation, and then we'll talk about parole in chapter 11, I think. So we'll move in through those, but that has been, I think that's all I want to talk to you about. Oh yeah, just you people rock. See you soon. So that's all I wanted to talk about today. It's just those things. Make sure that you read through the chapter. Make sure that you do your assignment and you get your quiz done. And other than that, I will see you in the next one.